Smoke Jumper 7, Smoke Jumper 7, this is Smoke Vet 6. Smoke Jumper 7, you are cleared hot at this time. Next mission, time now.
Smoke Vet 6, this is Smoke Jumper 7. Roger that. Next mission, time now.
Hey, what's shaking, Warfighter Nation? Ron here with Warfighter Ranch and Isaiah 6'8", bringing you a story session based on the questions that you've asked. One of the most overwhelming, by far, questions we get asked the most is, how did this bracelet thing start? What is that all about? So here it goes. I don't tie knots because it helps the carpal tunnel in both my hands. I don't tie knots because I have a partially paralyzed dominant right arm. I don't tie knots to prove a point. I don't tie knots out of boredom. I don't tie knots for recognition. And I don't tie knots for myself. I go through this process willingly to express my love to others in the best possible way that I know how, reaching deep every single time. I tie knots because God's given me a gift, but I didn't always see it that way. Once upon a time, I tried to exploit my gift, placing a dollar figure on it. I was wrong. I crashed hard and it almost killed me. I started tying knots because of my best friend, Bobby. I was in Mogadishu with Bobby 28 years ago. When we were there, I remember we were all hanging out in his hooch one day where 3 of the 4 horsemen lived. My hooch was a single quarters on the second floor of a building that had no second floor and mostly bullet-riddled walls and shrapnel-penetrated roofs and all this other stuff. It was made out of nothing but plywood and 2x4s and the sweat of the brow of these 3 other guys and me. No, there's not a Home Depot in the middle of Mogadishu. So we had to tactically acquire or liberate that wood from another unit. Bobby grabbed a single round out of one of my magazines, pulled the tip out with the Gerber, and melted the lead in the center of the round, creating a necklace charm, which he then attached to a piece of 550 cord to fashion something of a combat necklace. That's the first night I started tinkering with paracord. That's also the night I melted it too much and it dripped on my inner thigh while wearing my old gray Army PT shorts. Yeah, I still have the scar, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I know, another scar, right? Among others. But that scar, over the years, and I laugh every time I look at it, or at least crack a smile, because it's a reminder of the humble beginnings of our friendship, one that's lasted nearly 3 decades. When I became a paratrooper, there weren't too many days when I wasn't within arm's reach of some 550 cord. Like most paratroopers, we tinkered with it in the field, and the old guys always had another use for the stuff. I absorbed it like a sponge. Fast forward to 2008. And then a little over 12 years ago, our daughter Abby walks up and asks me one day, "Daddy, show me how to make your airborne thingies." I was a bit taken aback at first, asking, "What do you mean, baby girl? There are so many different airborne thingies," I joked. "The bracelets," she replied. And soon after, I started teaching Abby how to tie knots. An art project came up on her radar for her homeschooling. I did a little checking around, and discovered that the art teacher's father was a Vietnam veteran. I was all in on this one, and we tied a bracelet in Vietnam service ribbon colors, red, yellow, and green. We mailed it off to the teacher to be graded, and Abby received an A. When it came time to return the art projects to the students via the mail, I asked the teacher if she would honor our humble request in giving it to her father, and the most important part, to please tell him that we said, "Welcome home." She agreed, and I heard nothing more of it. About a week later, I received a phone call from the teacher who seemed like she was almost in tears. She wanted to tell me how overjoyed her father was and that he broke down upon being told "welcome home" from one of her students, a child, our daughter. And that's the moment that I began to realize what a powerful gift this could be to simply bring joy, not happiness, but true joy to an individual. We set up a little daddy-daughter lemonade stand style online presence, and I left it up to Abby regarding what to call it. Airborne Rods was her choice, and so it began. All in all, I only ever sold about 2,000 bracelets or so. I began giving them away at a much higher rate than I was selling them. Fortunately, this is easy to do when you buy 550 cord at 5,000 feet a shot. But this was a horrible way to operate as a business model, all generosity aside. At the time, I was diagnosed, heavily medicated, and barely treatable. I treated it like a job and went at it 15 or 16 hours a day, even when I didn't have to. It only took 5 or 6 years to run it into the ground. I was doing everything myself, and I simply couldn't keep up. There were not enough hours in the day. And then one day, some may remember, I found myself barricaded in the shop with a 357 in my mouth. I had been without sleep for 48 hours, and I was in the meltdown of a lifetime. I had no intention of ever leaving that room alive. If it were not for the strength and love of God, Helen and Abby staying right by my side during even those, the hardest hours of our lives, I certainly wouldn't have made it. Without them, I wouldn't be here. So there I was, as the saying goes, with a gun barrel and front sight post tickling the roof of my mouth. I don't know how long I was sitting there that way, but all of a sudden it dawned on me and I snapped out of it. It hit me like a Mack truck all at once. In about 5 seconds, this was all going to be over. At least for me anyway. I wasn't thinking about my wife or children. I wasn't thinking about God. I wasn't thinking about being grateful for the gift of my life. But all of a sudden it hit me like a lightning bolt, and in about 5 seconds I was going to meet my Creator. And not only that, I would have to attempt to justify to God how, as intelligent as He made me, how this was the best course of action I could come up with. And not only that, I was going to have to sell it like everything depended on it. Because it did. Not even I, in my bold and blissful arrogance, could BS myself to that level. Continuing on and going through with it would only prove one thing, that I was willing to let my pride kill me. Doing what all of our combined enemies failed to accomplish over the past quarter of a century. Funny thing, pride. It's something that our people are known for. However, we often forget that this is the sin that God hates the most. Pride comes before the fall. After that, I kind of disappeared for a while. I took a hiatus from social media, and I began praying and writing. This would continue for 3 years. I was broken down as much as I could be, and soon after, I realized my true identity in Christ. I knew about Jesus, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't about rules, it was about a relationship. I believed in God, but I didn't know Jesus. Huge difference. Soon thereafter, I found myself out in my shop one day, which had now been moved to the main area of the garage, the open 2 bays, a lot of sunlight, a lot more exposed, and a lot less isolated. Understandably, I found it difficult to go back into that room, even up to the day we moved. I had been unable to control anything, my mouth, my attitude, and I preferred to be alone most of the time. And then it happened. I was out in the garage one day, feeling like I'd wasted years of my life with nothing to show for it. I was praying and sobbing, feeling at a loss for any sense of direction. I was feeling sorry for myself. I fell to my knees and asked God if He indeed wished for me to continue tying knots. If He didn't, that would be fine by me. At least my carpal tunnel would be grateful. However, if He did, though, well, then my shop was now His, 100% for the rest of my days. And ever since that day, I've spent my time much differently with regard to my craft. Instead of focusing on large amounts of multiple piece orders, I would focus on one at a time, giving my absolute best regardless of the amount of time involved to each individual piece, to each individual person. It's funny what happens when you stop caring about income and start treating people like the divine, one-of-a-kind creations they are. I would be devoted to giving each individual my absolute best, regardless of the cost of the time. And God would take care of the rest. And ever since the end of Airborne Ron's and the beginning of the Isaiah 6:8 military outreach ministry, which is now the outreach arm for Warfighter Ranch, my already amazing life has become even more amazing. Now, as you might imagine, walking through your life with Christ is not always an easy walk, but it's definitely easier than trying to do it on your own. In reality, it's much more difficult in many ways, but well worth it. That's it for this session. You've got your spiritual chow. Pass it on to the next troop. Next mission, time now.